Hi, I'm Cassandra, and this is Fantasy Survival. I'm going to explore your favorite or not so favorite fantasy characters and what survival skills and or gear they might need to survive their fantasy world or situation. In this very first episode, we are using the 5 C's of survival and exploring what the Dunedain Rangers from the Lord of the Rings survival gear or skills would possibly be. What are the 5 C's of survival? The 5 C's of survival are used in the self-reliant world as a simple way to remember the basics of the basic gear or skills needed when surviving the wilderness. These 5 C's comprise of cutting, combustion, cover, container, and cordage. I will be breaking this video down into those 5 sections and talking about the gear and skills rangers would have under each. Now, J.R.R. Tolkien uses a lot of medieval influences in his writing of Middle-earth, so we will be referencing a lot of medieval gear and skills when talking about this subject. The first category we will be looking at is cutting. The gear found under the cutting category would be your knives, multi-tools, axes, and saws. You could break this category into 2 subcategories, one for weapons, the other utility blades. The Dunedain Rangers were descendants of the Númenors, and the Rangers became a secretive, wandering, and nomadic people. They would fight minor battles and skirmishes against orcs, trolls, and wolves to keep Middle-earth safe. They would probably have their main weapons, which would include some sort of bow and some sort of sword for these battles. Traditionally, soldiers would carry longbows, but since rangers would travel long distances and need to maintain agility when traveling, a short bow would make more sense. The short bow is light, fast, and lethal. It has a shorter draw than a longbow, which allows the archer to shoot multiple quick shots in less time. A shorter bow is easier to carry on horseback and allows you to take cover. It is more agile and allows for quicker movement. Short bows are perfect in close encounters or in close range. However, it has a shorter range compared to a longbow, and a short bow is less accurate, especially in a long-range battle. Now, I would have to say some rangers would probably have a crossbow instead of a short bow. Crossbows are only known to have been mentioned once in the stories about Arda as a weapon devised by the Númenóreans for hunting prey birds. The Dunedain Rangers are descendants of Númenor, so it's not that big of a leap to think the Rangers have knowledge of the use of crossbows and probably adapted them from hunting tools to defense weapons that could be used in battles with, say, orcs. Some of the advantages of using a crossbow is they use a locking mechanism. Crossbow men could handle stronger draw weights and hold for longer with significantly less physical strain, providing them with better precision. Later in the medieval period, still crossbows were made, and this was one of the best advancements because it increased the firing range of the crossbow to around 400 yards, which compared closely to that of the longbow range and increased the power of the bolt fired. With the metalworking talents of both the elves and dwarves, it's not impossible to think that Middle-earth had the skills to make these steel crossbows. Even in the movie adaptation, Uruk-hais had a pump-action crossbow. Although a longbowman could shoot 3 or 4 arrows during the time it would take for a crossbowman to shoot 1 arrow, and a crossbow cost a lot of money and time to make one, it still provided another weapon option that allowed rangers to travel with relative ease and be able to be agile and flexible for any numerous situations. Next weapon to talk about is the sword. Two-handed longswords are your typical sword for a fantasy hero. That is why in the movie version of The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn has Andorel, which is presented as a two-handed longsword. However, the book version is almost certainly an arming sword, a sword for use with one hand. In the first book, Andorel is compared to Boromir's sword, and Boromir, being a sword and shield fighter, is most certainly using a one-handed sword, because if you are always using a shield, you would not use a long sword needing 2 hands. Later, when Aragorn arms up for the Battle of the Hornburg, he himself picks up a shield from Theoden's armory. Now, an arming sword is smaller than a longsword, but it is less bulkier than a longsword and will probably be more practical when one is traveling armored, or lightly armored between towns. Also, it being smaller will lessen the chance it will get stuck in overgrown brush of a forest, leaving a Dunedain ranger, like Aragorn, able to walk through a wooded area easier or hide amongst the brush without getting caught in it. The next weapon I want to talk about is the falchion. Shad from Shadversity makes a very compelling argument for the falchion in one of his YouTube videos. If you are interested in ranger weapons, I would highly recommend his video instead of mine. I will put a link to that video in the description box below. Falchions are a single-handed, single-edged sword that originated in Europe. Cleaver falchions were shaped like a large bladed machete. According to research, the falchion sword was an adapted, sharp farming tool that was used by farm laborers. It was a weapon with the combined weight and power of an axe, but has the versatility of a sword. So it could be used to carve through chainmail or leather armor, or through thick brush when trudging through a thick overgrown forest. However, the falchion's weight could be a disadvantage when traveling from place to place, but still a great option that could have multiple use, both defensive and utilitarian. Also, most rangers would probably carry a dagger on their side. The dagger was often employed in the role of a secondary defense weapon in close combat. These weapons are typically designed as a thrusting or stabbing weapon instead of a cutting weapon. These were used where cutting attacks were ineffective, and the focus was on thrusting with a narrow blade to punch through mail, or aim at punching through armor plate intersections, or aiming at the eye slits of a helmet visor. The Dunedain Rangers could also use these daggers alongside their one-handed sword and became a dual-wielding nightmare for their foes. It makes them versatile in the sense that it allows them to defend and attack at the same time. Now for the utility cutting devices. Since most rangers would be living off the land while traveling from place to place, keeping the people of Middle-earth safe from attacks from orcs, they would also need tools for hunting and eating. So instead of, or in addition to the dagger, rangers would probably have some sort of hunting knife to clean any animal after they caught it. During the medieval period, hosts did not provide cutlery for their guests, so people carried their eating knives around. Until the 17th century, sharp, dagger-like knives were used to slice, tear, pierce, and poke whatever was on the plate. They would have an eating knife and probably a pricker. Eating knives were tucked away in a sheath and strung to one's belt. These utility knives were also found in a sheath as a set with daggers or hunting knives during the medieval period. Though utility knives and prickers could be used as a defense weapon, its primary purpose was an eating utensil. I think rangers of the Middle Earth probably had an eating knife similar to those used in the medieval period. They would keep it simple to just a eating knife, but some might have also a knife and pricker. These are some of the cutting options the Dunedain Rangers would probably carry to survive in Middle Earth while fighting the many threats they happen upon. This concludes part 1 of a multi-part series on the Dunedain's Rangers 5 C's of Survival. Hope you enjoyed watching and keep an eye out for part 2.